You know how we talk about our minds? We say things like, I have a strong ego, or I'm dealing with my anxiety, as if these are actual objects we're carrying around in our heads. Well, what if that entire way of thinking is just wrong? Today, we're diving into a really radical idea from the 1970s that tried to completely change the very words we use to describe our inner lives.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we're going to look at what I'm calling psychology's noun problem. Then, we'll get into the wild solution that was proposed, this language of action. After that, we'll see exactly how it works in practice. And finally, we'll explore the surprising legacy of this so-called rejected revolution.
All right, first up, this big noun problem. This really gets to the heart of how we usually talk about what's going on inside our heads. We tend to describe our minds like they're some kind of container, just filled with a collection of things. I mean, think about it for a second. We talk about the libido, a strong ego, defense mechanisms. These are all nouns, right? We treat them like they're these solid, concrete things that live inside of us and make us do stuff. But what if that's all just a convenient story we tell ourselves? And that leads to this really fascinating question. Do these things actually exist on their own? Or are they just convenient labels we've slapped onto incredibly complex, dynamic processes? Things we do rather than things we have. So this brings us to the big solution. Back in 1976, a psychoanalyst named Roy Schaefer came along and offered this super radical alternative to fix this exact problem. He called it action language. So what is it? Well, the core idea of action language is to basically invent a whole new vocabulary for psychology. The goal is to describe everything happening in our minds not as static objects, but as active, dynamic processes. Really, it's all about shifting from nouns to verbs. And get this, he wasn't messing around. This wasn't just a minor suggestion. Schaefer's proposal meant you had to give up all nouns and adjectives when talking about psychology. Seriously. No more ego, and no more describing that ego as strong or weak. It was a total overhaul of the basic grammar of the mind. So you're probably thinking, okay, how on earth does that even work? How do you talk about the mind without using the words we've been using for 100 years? Well, it's actually simpler and way more profound than you might think. It all boils down to 3 steps. Step 1, you ditch the nouns. So no more ego, libido, none of that. Step 2, you get rid of the adjectives. Nothing is strong or weak or repressed. And step 3, you replace all of that with verbs and adverbs. You focus only on describing what someone is doing and how they are doing it. And this example just makes it so clear. Instead of saying he has a strong ego, which sounds like he possesses an object, you'd say he acts confidently and effectively. See the difference? You're not labeling a thing anymore. You're describing a way of acting in the world. Here's another perfect one. Instead of a passive statement like, she has become friendly, which kind of suggests a switch was flipped, action language makes it active. She is behaving in a more friendly manner than before. It's a small change in words, but it's a huge shift in perspective. It's about what she's doing. So this is the really crucial part. With action language, everything is an action. Even our motivations aren't these separate forces that are pushing us around. Nope, they're just part of the action itself. The thoughts leading up to it, the feelings, the behavior, it's all one single unified process of doing something. So how did the world react to this revolutionary idea? Well, as you can probably guess, when you tell an entire scientific field to completely change its basic vocabulary, it doesn't always go over that well. When Schaefer put this idea out there in 1976, it was met with some really harsh criticism. I mean, for a lot of people, the idea of just throwing out a century's worth of terms was way too extreme, and it never really caught on in a big way. But that is not the end of the story. Its core ideas kind of went underground and started influencing modern psychological thought, especially in what we now call relational and intersubjective theories. And these are just perspectives that see our minds as being constantly shaped by our interactions with other people, which, when you think about it, sounds an awful lot like an active, process-based idea, doesn't it? Looking back now, you can see action language as this really important early nudge. It helped push psychology away from a one-person psychology, the idea of the mind as this isolated little machine with gears and levers inside, and toward a much more dynamic view of people as actors, constantly relating to the world and to each other.
So, what's the big takeaway here? First, and this is huge, the words we use really, really matter. They literally build the reality of how we see ourselves. Second, this gives us a powerful new way to think. We're not just containers holding psychological stuff, we are actors. And finally, just focusing on what we're doing, the process, instead of getting stuck on static, unchanging traits, well, that can be an incredibly liberating way to see things.
And so I'll leave you with this to think about. The next time you're thinking about yourself, just try it. Instead of saying, I have anxiety, try to describe what you're doing when you're feeling anxious. Instead of, I have low self-esteem, describe how you're acting unconfidently. How might that change how you see yourself, and maybe even your power to change?